And the short version of that is that if we work with the host town to own or operate the arrays in those towns, we get effectively an HOV lane for the solar development at the state level. And when we work with a town like that in the solar program, we get HOV lane treatment, which is just more predictable, more certain. And we're certainly looking for a process that is less fraught with potential problematic paths and development, lowers the chances of getting into painful litigation, and overall can make a more cooperative design process.
Hi, I'm Chris McDermott. I'm with AMP. I manage our policy and our strategy. And just to add on to Evan's presentation, the genesis of this public entity idea is really quite recent. It was when the new regulations for the SMART program were announced in April of 2020. And in terms of what that's supposed to look like, there was no guidance. There was just something in the regulation that talked about it being something could be a public solar project if it was operated by the town in which the solar array was located. But there was no additional guidance. And so this gets to a question that was raised earlier as to why we need an MOU. And we need an MOU so we can go back to the DOER and say, hey, this is our idea. This is how we are interpreting your regulation. Here's our proposal. What do you think? And so that's really why we need the MOU. And there's a two-stage process in the approvals with the DOER. There's an initial stage prior to any construction, and then there's a final stage. And the DOER guidelines, what they have given us as guidance is to say they want to see an MOU at that initial stage, and then they want to see the contract at the final stage post-construction. So even though we don't know exactly what the DOER is thinking, we know that we need to give them an MOU early on just to ask for their blessing if we're on the right track.
Generally speaking, you get exemption from some of the land use layers like the biomap stuff they talk about, and you get a little bit, well, that's the main thing. In this case, it's the main thing. The biomap that covers 95% of Shutesbury. So there are other ways to work in those areas, but the public entity is the cleanest. It's the preferred or the favored nation status of the category 1 of the 3 types of projects. So it gets up there with agriculture and building mounted and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question just around the sequencing here and the timing of signing an MOU. I think Chris, maybe McDermott, you were speaking to this. So I think on the schedule, it talked about taking the MOU, assigned MOU to DOER sometime around April, and that there's a two-stage approval process. That there's an initial, what DOR does an initial approval prior to construction, and then a final agreement on the contract, that they look at the final contract. So I assume it's an MOU, then there's a final contract. Can you clarify what that is? And then also, I guess, with that, why the MOU now before any filings to the planning?
The MOU would be part of the filing. So as Evan said, with respect to the HOV lane, there's normally a number of prerequisites that you need to have before you can file. Interconnection, for instance, is a very large part of that. And we don't have yet a signed interconnection agreement from the utility. And so what this allows us to do is apply to the program without that interconnection agreement. So that's why there's kind of two reasons why we'd like to have this MOU. One, so we can see if the DOER likes the idea, likes our arrangement, because as I explained, they have no guidance. So we need to ask them if this is within the framework of what they were thinking about. That's reason number one for the MOU. Reason number two for the MOU is because of the existence of the MOU and the fact that this under the MOU could be considered a public project, we can apply to the program generally to get what's called our smart reservation. So when you get a smart reservation, you aren't only reserving the public adder, which is related to the public entity aspect of the project, you're reserving the entire tariff. And so that's what it's kind of a two-pronged process with the MOU. The fact that it's public allows us to get the blessing of the DOER. The fact that it's public allows us to reserve the entire tariff sooner than we would have been able to do otherwise.
Can I interject? Rita, were you asking about why the MOU before they file proposals for special permits, not to the state? Because I think.
Yeah,
yeah,
because,
it was-
and I think what I was just hearing is that the MOU is going to be part of your application to the planning board too? Is that
I think
correct?
we're turning those two around.
No.
Okay.
The MOU we're starting now because it will take a lot of time, right? We'd like to know going into this if we're doing a traditional community solar. If you guys just said thanks, but no thanks,
Okay,
we'd go back the traditional community solar route. It has some design implications, although not a ton.
okay,
It's similarly, solar on the ground is solar on the ground, but it does make for smaller projects and some other discussions along the pilot territory that are different. But part of it is just we want to see if there's legs here. That's going to take time to do it well. I'm sure Donna and Tom Reedy and Chris and myself would have a lot of work to do getting an MOU in the place where we're all happy with it. And we want the time to take months to do it. So in the meantime, we still have a lot of application materials and plans to build with every one of these sites. But the submissions to the planning board will take a lot of time as well. And they can run kind of in parallel.